Hey guys, today's lesson is about elections, how elections work, why they're important, and what it's like to participate in an election. Then we are also going to be talking about a very unusual election system called the Electoral College. Now, there's some specialized vocab words here, which I've underlined in the video. You're going to want to pay close attention to these words since most of the definitions are new and they don't appear in your on your vocab list in your unit packet. So let's start by talking about why elections are so important. Well, elections are a basic part of democracy. It's how citizens have a say in their government. So, no elections, no democracy, and the government can then pretty much do whatever they want without you having a say in it. Now, in America, unfortunately, you guys will not be able to vote until you're 18. That is the minimum voting age. And the voting process actually changes a little bit state by state, but for the most part, most states still use what we call a paper ballot system, the ballot being your actual paper vote that you cast. So, this is actually one of the few areas of life that has not gone digital yet, although I would expect that to change sometime in the near future. Okay, so here we have an actual ballot. This is a ballot from Monroe County in the 2018 election. If your parents voted in 2018, this is exactly what they would have seen. I know in Orleans County, this is almost identical to what I see, although some of the candidates are a little bit different. The first thing you might notice here is that it's a bubble sheet. So in New York State, voting is a little bit like taking a test. You bubble in the bubble above the name of the candidate that you choose, and then you slip it into a Scantron machine, and that is how your vote is recorded. Now, first, what I want to do is look across the top of the ballot where it says office, and that's referring to what government position you're voting for. And the first thing to notice here is in this election, there was no option to vote for president because this was what we call a midterm election. It was 2018, which was the middle of Donald Trump's 4 year term in office. He was elected in 2016 and he serves until 2020. So, on a midterm ballot or in a midterm election, there's no option for president. Usually, the most important government office that you're voting for appears at the top of the ballot or the first column on the ballot in this case. And in 2018, that was the election for governor. Governor Cuomo was up for re-election along with his lieutenant governor, Kathy Hochul. And just like when you vote for president, you don't vote for a separate vice president. In New York State, when you vote for governor, you're also voting for whoever the governor chooses to be his lieutenant governor, which is like the vice governor of the state. And next to governor, we see the next office on this ballot is comptroller. That person is in charge of overseeing all the money and the finances of the government in the state. The attorney general, which is the top lawyer in New York State. They make a lot of decisions that involve law and crimes and prosecutions. And next to that, we see United States Senator. So this was an election year for your U.S. Senator. United States Senators serve 6 year terms. And so you only get to vote for a U.S. Senator once every 3 years. But this happened to be an election year or re-election year for Kirsten Gillibrand, your United States Senator. Then the next office, I see State Supreme Court Justice. We do vote for Supreme Court judges in New York State for the New York State Supreme Court. Of course, the United States Supreme Court down in Washington, D.C., that is different because those judges are picked by the president, they're appointed by the president, and they are approved by Congress. So the public does not get to vote for those judges. But at the state level and also at the local level, many times judges are actually an elected position. And then finally, we see in the last column your representative in Congress. I'm actually a little bit confused about why there are two columns there. Um, I guess I'll have to take a look at that ballot a little closer. But that is your representative in the House of Representatives. And in this case, Joe Morelle was up for, I believe, reelection. Now, if you go back to office, the box that says office, and you start going down the column, you notice how the arms that have the hand, yes, that's an arm and a hand pointing at the candidate, they're labeled. And those labels are political parties: the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Conservative Party, the Green Party, and so on and so forth. Political parties is a little more complicated topic I'd like to get into in a different lecture, a different video. So I'm going to keep it simple here. Political parties are groups of people who share similar ideas about how the government should be run. They sponsor candidates by helping to pay for their campaign. So your campaign means all the things that you do to get elected. It involves a lot of traveling, making a lot of speeches, uh, probably taking out commercials, paying for commercials on television, or even simple things like the campaign signs that you see on people's lawns in the fall during election season. All of that stuff takes money, and it actually takes quite a bit of money. And most people don't have that kind of money that they can just pay out of their pocket. So it helps. In fact, it's almost completely necessary to be elected. You're going to need to be sponsored by a political party. The main political parties in America are the Democrats and the Republicans, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. There are other parties. When we go down the list here, we see a conservative party, and you might notice that the conservative party candidate is the same candidate as the Republican Party. So Marc Molinaro, who is running for governor against Governor Cuomo, he got sponsored by two parties. It didn't help him any. He still lost the election, but I guess getting sponsored by two parties is always better than one. Then you see the Green Party, the Independence Party, and you'll notice the Working Families Party was another party along with the Independent Party that sponsored Andrew Cuomo. So his main political party is certainly the Democratic Party, but he had other parties that sponsored him. And then there's my favorite at the very bottom, the write-in, where you can write in somebody's name. You could write in your neighbor, you could write in a friend. It doesn't mean that they're going to get elected. You could write in the name of your pet. I don't ever recommend doing that on a ballot. You really want to vote for someone who has a chance, but you could potentially vote for somebody that is not on the ballot. So here is a list of other political offices which might appear on the ballot, people who you can vote for. If you live in a village or if you live in a city, you might find yourself voting for the mayor. If you live in a town, you would be voting for the town supervisor, the head executive of the town. In New York State, you might be voting for a New York State Assembly person or a New York State senator. And you actually vote for sheriffs as well. Now, this is not the same as a sheriff's deputy. These are not the people who pull you over in the marked cars. Those are sheriff deputies. But there is one sheriff who runs the entire sheriff department, and that person is an elected official. And you could also be voting for town board members. And those board members usually serve for 2-year terms. There is another election that takes place in May, and I guess I had not previously mentioned that, in case you don't already know, election time is in November, right? So election day is always the second Tuesday in November. But there are school board elections and school budget elections that take place in, at least in this part of the country, in New York State, they take place in May. And in May, your parents are asked to come and vote on the school budget, whether they approve of the amount of money that the school is spending for the school year, because that money comes from their taxes. So the community is given a chance to vote on that, and also to vote on school board members. The school board is like a town board, but it runs the school district. So with all of these choices, it's really quite a responsibility for you as a citizen when it comes time for you to vote, to make sure that you are doing at least a little bit of research on who the candidates are and what their positions are on important issues. The last thing you want to do is walk into your polling station where the voting takes place and pick up this ballot and not know any of these people, because then you would be making random guesses, and decisions that affect communities and schools and the entire nation really should be made based on information and research, and not just on, well, this choice looks good, or I've heard of this name before, I'm going to pick them. So it is definitely a big responsibility, voting. It's a responsibility to stay informed, to stay up to date with current events, and especially with the bigger candidates or the bigger offices like president, vice president, or senators and congresspeople. You really should know a little bit about who those people are before you decide to bubble in that ballot and vote for them. Now, this concludes part 1 of this lesson. Your code word for part 1 of the video is Obi-Wan, the famous Star Wars character who made a guest appearance today. You will need that code word for the part 1 quiz. Also, for the part 1 quiz, please be aware that although most of the questions are based on the information from the video, I am going to ask you some questions about how long these elected officials serve in office. The time that they are allowed to serve in office is called the term of office, and you'll need to do some internet research to answer those questions. At this point, please pause the video and take the part 1 quiz before moving on to the second part of the video. And now for maybe the most confusing topic in all of social studies, the Electoral College. The Electoral College is not a school. It's a system for how the president and the vice president are elected. Because get ready for this, your vote is not what elects the president. Instead, the Constitution spells out the rules for this complicated system where 538 electors cast the final vote for president in December after the popular vote takes place. So let's start by looking at that term, popular vote. A popular vote is an election where all citizens participate. Everybody votes, and the candidate with the most votes wins. It's called a popular vote because all the people participate. And there is a popular vote for president. It takes place on election day in November. But as crazy as it sounds, your vote in November does not elect the president. Although, as we will see, that doesn't mean that your vote doesn't count. So who are these electors? Well, first of all, understand that they're people, and they are people who are nominated by the state legislatures. And each state gets a different number of electors depending on its size. So states get one elector for every representative they have in Congress. That would be the number of representatives that they have in the House of Representatives. For example, New York State has 27 members in the House of Representatives, and then an additional 2 electors for the 2 senators that each state gets in Congress. So basically, the number of members of the House of Representatives that your state has plus 2. In the case of New York State, that works out to 29 electors. So at this point, we're going to switch over to a really cool website that shows how the Electoral College works. It's going to be a lot easier to explain this if we're both looking at the same screen here. So what we've got here is a map of the United States, and it shows how many electors each state gets in the Electoral College. So again, there's New York with 29 electors. And we're going to run an election here. Let's see if we can get rid of some of these ads down here. We're going to run an election, and we're going to do some basic math here, and we'll see that because there's 538 electors, to win the presidency, you're going to need 270, which is slightly more than half. So that's the majority. Now, very sort of confusing thing here to understand is that within each state, there is a popular vote for president. Of course, it takes place in November. And those 29 electors, using New York as an example, those 29 electors are all going to vote for one candidate. They're not going to be split between different candidates. So what I mean by that is if you're a candidate for president, you're really hoping that big states like New York and Texas and California are going to vote for you. You really want to win that popular election in that state, because the winner of the popular election within any given state gets all of the Electoral College votes for that state. So let's say that in this next election, Joe Biden, who it looks like Joe Biden will probably be the candidate for the Democratic Party at this point. Let's say that he's running against Trump in 2020. In fact, you see all these little pop-up ads down here keep showing them. Let's say that he wins New York State in the popular vote, but he only gets maybe 52% of the state votes for him. All right, so he gets a majority, but he doesn't get a lot of a majority. He only gets 2% majority. He gets 52% of the votes, and Trump gets 48%. Well, that doesn't mean that they're going to split those 29 electors and give 52% of the 29 electors Biden's vote and 48% of those electors vote for Trump. Nope. If Biden wins in New York, he gets all 29 of those Electoral College votes. And let's do that right now. We're going to click that blue, which is typically the color used to represent the Democratic Party. And let's say, again, he wins the popular vote in New York State, so he gets all 29 of those electors. All 29 of those electors will now vote for Joe Biden. At least that's usually how it happens, and I'll explain a couple of exceptions in a few minutes. So this is why presidential candidates tend to spend a lot of time campaigning, going out and making speeches and paying for television commercials and things like that in big states like Texas. We'll give Texas to Trump. California, which almost always votes for the Democratic candidate in the popular election. Florida, which is one of the reasons why Trump won in the last election, because he was able to win the popular vote in Florida. But let's say that this time Joe Biden gets that popular vote in Florida. So we'll play around with the map a little bit. Let's give Trump Oregon. Let's give Trump Montana, Wyoming. Idaho votes for Trump. Utah votes for Trump. Nevada votes for Trump. Looks like Trump is making good progress, right? But Biden wins Arizona. Biden wins Minnesota. Biden wins Pennsylvania. As I already said, Biden wins Florida. We'll pretend that Biden even carries Georgia and wins the votes in that state. So now look what's happened. Even though on the map, it looks like Trump should be in the lead, in this election, he's actually quite far behind because of this system where the winner takes all of the Electoral College votes in these states that have a bigger population. So look at the lead that Biden has, 170 to Trump's 105 votes. We can keep giving Trump states here, But unless he wins some of the big states that have a heavy population, he's actually losing at this point to Joe Biden. I meant to do red for Mississippi there. So we'll continue here. We'll say that Ohio goes to Biden. We will give Trump Iowa. We'll give Trump Washington. Actually, no, we're going to give Biden Washington State. I think they're going to vote for the Democratic candidate. And we'll give Trump West Virginia. Trump gets South Carolina. But again, look at the scale up here. Look at the number of votes. The Democratic candidate is well in the lead here, despite the red, which represents the Republicans. It looks like there's more red on the map, and there is. But these are states that have low populations, a lot of land, but not a lot of people, so not a lot of electoral college votes. And at this point, Biden is probably going to carry the day here. In fact, with just a couple more states, he's almost reached his 270. We'll give him Virginia. That's Virginia there. Goes to Biden. And now look, he's only 16 votes away from winning. So Trump can win a lot of states here. He can win Connecticut. He can win tiny little Rhode Island. He can win New Hampshire. And he can win Vermont. And he can win as much as he wants here, really, and he's still not going to win the election because the more populated states have already been won by Joe Biden, and 265. So at this point, all Biden needs is 5 more electoral college votes. He wins Alabama, and he wins the election. Trump could win all of these other states, but oops, I guess I'm not to 270 yet. Let's do New Jersey is probably going to go Biden. And now the Democratic candidate with 279 electoral college votes has reached that magic number of 270 and has won the election. And again, Trump can win all these states if he wants, but he's not going to get the 270 votes necessary to win. So we're giving this election to Joe Biden. This is not meant to be a prediction of the election. I just wanted to show you how the system works because it does lead to some very strange situations. For example, in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton, who ran against Donald Trump, actually won the popular vote. She had more votes overall in the popular vote than Donald Trump. Not a lot more, but I want to say it was maybe 400,000 or 500,000 more votes than Donald Trump, which might sound like a lot to you, but in a country of 300 million people, it was a very narrow margin. So she won the popular vote by maybe 1%. But Trump was very smart in the way that he campaigned, and he was able to win a lot of these big states that had a lot of electoral college votes. And because of this winner-take-all system, if you win the popular vote in any given state, you get all the electoral college votes. He was able to pull off a victory in the electoral college. Now, I said that the winner takes all, but there are some exceptions to that. First of all, the one thing to know is that those electors can vote for whoever they want, which sort of answers the question of why do we have this system? There was a purpose to this system, and there was a purpose to why the founding fathers wrote this system into the Constitution. And just to kind of put it bluntly, the reason why is they didn't trust the people. The founding fathers were afraid that if you allowed the people to pick the president, the people could make a mistake. There might be a candidate who made promises that they never intended to keep, candidates who perhaps were just not good people, and they wanted some sort of, I guess you could call it a parachute or an emergency plan, a plan B, that if the people elected someone who was going to be really bad for the country, then these electors could always change that at the last minute in the electoral college. I almost said very rarely, it really never happens. Electors almost always vote for whatever candidate wins the popular vote in their state, but they don't have to. They could change their mind and vote for the person who didn't win the popular election in their state. And there is a term for those electors. They are called faithless electors. It is not a very nice term. It's sort of an insulting term because it's just the tradition is such that electors are supposed to vote for the winner of the popular vote in their state. But again, they can choose to vote for somebody different if they really feel that the winner of the election in their state is going to be that bad of a president. They can change their vote and cast it really for whoever they want. But again, that very rarely happens. And I do not believe there has ever been a presidential election where the results were changed because electors became, that the term is faithless, and changed their vote and voted for someone who did not win their state. That just doesn't happen. There is another interesting exception here. At least it's interesting to me because I learned it just today when I was doing my research here. And that exception is in Nebraska and in Maine. And in those two states, the electors, what they do is they take a popular vote in each of the congressional districts, each of those little chunks in the state where you vote for your congressional representative. And the electors are assigned to those little congressional districts, and whoever wins the popular vote in their district, they cast their electoral college vote for that candidate. We're not talking about a lot of votes here, but in the case of Maine and I believe it is Nebraska, the candidate might not get all of those votes, but those two states are really not going to sway a presidential election very much. So this website here, I will post the link for you on Google Classroom, and you can play with it if you want. I believe this website, and if it's not this website, you can just do a search for Electoral College Interactive Map, and there's a couple other websites as well. But one of those websites I know will let you go back and replay elections of the past and sort of change a state here or there and see who would win if those changes were made. So that's the end of the lesson. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to take the quiz for part 2 of this video lesson.